Another incredibly important and powerful feature in Power Pivot are measures. Measures are calculations, but they're different from calculated columns. A measure is an aggregate. It's not done on a row by row basis. It's just a total of some sort. And it appears in what they call the calculated area. So let's look at, for example, the customers table here in our Power Pivot. The calculation area is this area here. If you can't see it, right-click customers and show the calculation area. If I untick it, the calculation area disappears, and if I right-click customers and tick show calculation area, it reappears. So the calculation area is where you put your measures. And you can put it in any cell. That makes sense. So for example, I might put this at the foot of customer ID. It is resizable. I can lift this up, lift it down, resizable. Now in this cell, I want to create a measure that's called customer number. So I type customer, let me just click in there, customer number, and it's appearing up here in the formula bar, customer number, colon equals, so it's very similar to a calculated column at this stage, but now I want to use a function called distinct count. So I hit D-I-S. Distinct count is when I want to count the distinct values, the unique instances of each customer ID. So I tab or double click distinct count, square bracket, and I choose which column. So I want to count the customer IDs. And close bracket, and when I press enter, it will show me a measure called customer number, which counts the distinct instances of the customer ID in this column. And so I press enter, and if I widen this column, I can see there's 91 customers, and that's my measure. So a measure therefore appears at the foot of a column in the calculation area, but it also appears in the diagram view. So when I hit my diagram view button, I look at my customers table, I see the measure at the bottom here. So anything that, and if I rest on it, it actually said measure. I just need to hold it for a while. So this is a measure, whereas this is a column. As I rest on them, it tells me that. Your measures and how they differ from your calculated columns, a measure is often used as a value in a pivot table, whereas a calculated column is often used as a row or a column in your pivot table. So a calculated column is a row or a column in a pivot table or a pivot chart, and a measure is a value in a pivot table or pivot chart. A measure is a single value, it's an aggregate, whereas a calculated column calculates a result per row in a table, and so it's what they call a row iteration. Measures are more efficient than calculated columns because calculated columns actually increase the size of your file and your data set, and you can imagine that. So if I go back to data view, these calculated columns that we were doing actually add to the size of the data, and it's per row, whereas a measure sits at the foot and it's just a single result, and that's usually a value in a pivot table, whereas these are more likely to be rows or columns in a pivot table. So I hope that makes sense. You can also delete a measure just quite quickly. If I went back to customers, for example, and I didn't want this measure, I would simply click on the measure, press the delete key, and it says, do you want to permanently delete this measure? And I'm actually going to delete it from the data model. So I click delete from model. And that's how easy it is to delete a measure. Almost too easy.